Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, this is Heath Einstein, Vice Provost for Enrollment Management at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. Prior to my time at TCU, I spent years as a high school counselor, and my career got started in the admission office at my alma mater, the George Washington University.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good morning, friends. Before we get into our content for today, I just have two quick messages. So the first thing I want to share with you is we are only 12 episodes away from the big 600. And we started a new tradition. It started on episode 500. We crowdsource our wisdom. So in episode 600, you will hear from our listeners who will share a tip they've learned in the admission process. And it doesn't have to come from this podcast, by the way. For episode 500, we kind of focused on things you've learned from this podcast, but we're broadening it out. Any tip you've learned in the admission process that you are willing to bequeath to another listener, another student, another parent, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK and say, this is a tip you're sharing. And most of them we will play on the air in 12 episodes from now or 6 Mondays from now. So go ahead and share your tip. You don't have to wait until the last second. All right, friends, I just want to share one or two quick things again about our survey. So over 500 of you completed our survey, and we posted the results because we promised you we would share the results with you if you did complete the survey. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and look under the results tab, and you'll see YCBK listener survey. Now, two things I want to say. One is we did not put all the individual comments up there. We have over 100 pages of comments. So you're going to hear me repeatedly refer to, based on the survey, we're implementing this change. You're not going to see all that up there. So, but we did put all the hardcore data up there. And so that's one thing. The second thing is I know I announced that on Thursday. It's up there. But the version that we put up on the survey after 7 p.m. Eastern time is a lot clearer to read. It's a PDF. The other one was pretty small. So if you went up there before 7 p.m. Eastern time last Thursday, probably was very miniature. You might not even read it because it was so small. We fixed that. Now you should be able to read it clearly. All right, let's get into today's episode. Well, I said, you speak, we listen. And one of the things that came through loud and clear in your over 500 responses is you love hearing from co-hosts that are doing admissions now, reading files now. So as a result of that, it's one reason we reached out and expanded, added Kate Strickland. Some of you said, hey, everybody's a small liberal arts college. Can you give us somebody else sometimes? So we've added Kate into our rotation, and we've also added Heath Einstein. So, and you're going to hear from Heath today, but you don't just get one question from a listener, you get two. So two of listeners from California sent in follow-up questions about Heath's series he did the last 3 weeks on teacher recommendations. And rather than have me or the team answer it, why not go directly to Heath? So you'll hear from Heath directly on two questions. You're saying, why two? Because they're shorties. You do a shorty, we can get more in. So that's what you'll hear in the question from a listener. And some of you know, you regulars, that I brought back admissions tip, admission vernacular, big number. Well, you got to really be old school to remember. Every once in a while, I would have a grinding my gears And that's right. This week, you're also getting a What's Grinding My Gears. I know some of you write in and say, my favorite part is when Stuck does is grinding your gears. So you'll get a Grinding My Gears today, as well as admissions vernacular, admissions tip, and a big number. And then after that, we do have a brand new interview for you. And it's a two-parter. One I really enjoy doing is with Jay Hamilton, Dr. Jay Hamilton. He is a Stanford professor, and he is the author of the new book, just came out, hot off the press, March 2025. You Got In, Now What? It's 100 insights into finding your best life in college. It's a fascinating thing what Jay did. I'm not going to say too much of it now because in the interview he goes into more detail on this, but he read 300 books, all from Stanford professors. And he really focused on their college years. What was going on in their college years? So lots of memoirs, biographies. And then he distilled it into 100 tips that could be used to help any student to make the most out of college. So it's a book I highly, highly recommend you pick up. And I haven't talked to anyone yet who has picked it up who hasn't regretted it. But I'll be interviewing Dr. Jay Hamilton, and that's a two-parter. So you'll hear part one this week and part two next week. All right, friends. Next voice you'll hear is a question from a listener and a response from our own Heath Einstein, Vice Provost of Enrollment at TCU in Fort Worth, Texas.
Hey, Mark, it's Barbara here from Akala. I just listened to the interview with Heath. He's so amazing. Anyway, a quick question, though, of a clarification when he talked about stick to the classroom. What about a teacher who not only is the classroom teacher, but is the advisor of a club in which the student is heavily involved? Is that a situation where the recommender can go outside of the classroom and also talk about that? Much appreciated answer. Thank you so much, as always, for everything that you do.
Barbara, you ask a great question about whether teacher recommendations should include insights that a teacher might have as a club advisor. And you could extend that to a coach or some other role that the teacher plays aside from the classroom instructor. And I would say, yes, those are insights that would be very valuable because they capture more than what a school counselor might be able to capture in the counselor letter of recommendation. So I think it's an important clarifying question, and teachers should feel comfortable expanding the scope of their letter to match the scope of the relationship.
All right, friends, that was a response to the first question from a California listener, and we have another California listener who sent in a question. So let's hear that one now.
Hi, my name is Kim, and I'm calling from Newport Beach, California. I have a question about what your TCU admissions director said about teacher recommendations. I thought it was super helpful, and I love to hear it. I did have a question specifically about overcoming an obstacle and having, if a teacher witnessed that or, knows about it, to have the teacher write about that specifically. And I was wondering if what if it's more of a behavioral, they had a lot of behavioral growth. For example, my daughter just kind of made a poor decision freshman year and was disciplined for that. But since then has joined student council and has become, I think a peer that others look up to, and really has become kind of like to sing the school's praises and become really talk to a lot of kids about coming there. So I was wondering if that is something that the teacher would want to write about, or if it's more like, oh, the TCU admissions director gave the example of, oh, he broke his arm and, continued to root on the baseball team or whatever. I hope that question makes sense. I really enjoy your podcast, and thanks so much.
Hi, Kim, and greetings from someone else who is from Orange County. I grew up just a little bit north of Newport Beach. You ask a really good question about overcoming obstacles and if the nature of the obstacle that has been overcome matters. It is perfectly okay to discuss behavioral issues, but I think how you phrase the comments is really important. So, for example, you probably wouldn't want to say the student overcame behavioral issues related to physical violence in ninth grade, but now, thankfully, is no longer a violent person, right? That's not something that a college wants to hear. It's not something you want to share. But I do think it's okay to say something along the lines of, as is typical of many early adolescent students, this student arrived in high school very much like a late middle school student, and over the years has matured greatly. And this has been illustrated in examples X, Y, and Z. So maybe not focusing on the specifics of the behavioral issues, but speaking more generally about that growth, even if it's along the behavioral dimension. So good luck.
All right, friends. So that concludes the questions from a listener from today. But as promised, I told you you're going to get an admissions tip, admissions vernacular, big number, and what's grinding my gears. So let's start with admissions vernacular. Now, this is a rather obscure term. I don't hear admission officers use it a lot. Some offices use this term internally. I find it very helpful to tell my students and parents I'm working with about this term. And what is it? Stuck. What is it? It's UTE. What does UTE stand for? Unlikely to enroll. So the way that this can be used is internally when an admission office is talking about a candidate, they can sense the lack of engagement and they can say, this kid looks amazing, but they're not coming. So they slap UTE on them, and the student gets normally deferred early or waitlisted in regular admissions. Not very many schools do denials, but there are some that do. So how do you avoid UTE? You got to have a lot of engagement. UTE is the term of the day. All right, friends. Next up, we're going to go with the big number. Now, this is tricky because you know how we say you can take numbers and make them mean anything? Well, there's some truth to that, right? Statistics can be misleading. But these numbers are so overwhelming that there's a nice chunk of truth to it. So what is the number? Well, which college has the biggest advantage between applying early decision and regular decision, just off the statistics? All right. Well, there are a lot of colleges that have an admit rate that is more than 4 times their admit rate in regular. And this is just based off published data, by the way. The school tells you their admit rate in regular versus their ED admit rate. So what are some that have more than 4 times a higher probability of admission, early decision to regular? Dartmouth College, 17% admit rate in ED, 4% in regular. Barnard College, 4.33%. Higher likelihood, 26% admit rate in ED, 6% in regular. Trinity University, 4.36 differential. And all I'm doing is dividing the admit rate in regular versus in early decision. So you go from 48% ED, 11% regular. Then we have Brown University, 4.5 times more likely, 18% ED, 4% regular. Now we're into the top 3. Colby College, 25% admit rate in ED, 5% in regular, 5 times higher admit rate. Now, the last 2 are in their own league. They're more than double the previous ones. Coming in at number 2, Northeastern University. They are reporting a 4% admit rate in regular, which, by the way, don't get me started. That's because they don't count students that they admit to their satellite campuses in these statistics, because those are considered transfer students who then transfer back to Boston. But this is Boston, 4% admit rate to the Boston campus, 43% admit rate ED, almost an 11 times greater chance, 10.75 to be accurate. And in the leading position, Tulane in New Orleans, 5% admit rate in regular, which, by the way, is way up. I remember it was under 1 for a few years. 59% admit rate in ED, almost 12 times higher probability of an admit rate in ED versus regular. Another thing that makes Tulane the standout here is they have one of the highest percentage of total students that they admit in the early decision round. So it's a shorter list of schools that take more than 6 out of 10 of their kids in the early round. So it's very different, right? You've got the ratio between your acceptances in early versus regular. The higher that number, the more emphasis on ED. And then you got the percentage of the class. Well, when you're in the 60% plus class, you know that the school's got a heavy emphasis on ED, and Tulane is in the 60% plus class. By the way, of the schools that I listed today, you had Barnard at 60%, you had Colby at 60%, and you have Tulane at 63%. By the way, next week, I'll reveal who took the highest percentage of their students in ED in my big number section. Now, why are numbers misleading? Well, I'm going to point to no one else other than Dartmouth College. So when I was interviewing Lee Coffin on this podcast with Julia, I pointed out that in that particular year, it looked like Dartmouth had the biggest ED advantage. They were reporting a 28% admit rate in D and a 4% admit rate in regular. So I basically said to Lee, what's up with that? And I loved his answer. And this was his answer. We are 24% smaller than any other Ivy League school, and we have the same number of athletic teams. If we took out athletic recruits, our number would be 12%. So instead of 28-4, 12-4. So just off athletic recruits alone, you can tell that this number, you can't just go by the number, right? Numbers can be a little misleading. Furthermore, it is a fact the early pool is stronger than the regular pool. So you are seeing a stronger applicant pool. And it's also where you will tend to see a lot of other hooked applicants will come in there, such as alumni, donors, etc., faculty, kids. So you can't just look at the ED ratio with RD and discern, well, it's 4 times more likely, 3 times more likely, because it's a stronger applicant pool and the hooked applicants like athletes and others are coming in that pool. However, it's still an advantage. It's a big advantage. You just can't use the numbers to tell how much of an advantage it is. There we go. That's our big number of the week. Now, admissions tip. Now, this is just something I started using less than 3 weeks ago with my students. So if you actually worked with me more than 3 weeks ago, this is not something that you would hear. But right now, for those of us who are college counselors, a lot of our time is being focused on the UC or the University of California app. Why is that? Well, you have a lot of schools that come in early with their 10-15 and 11-1 deadlines, right? That's like the first wave. And there are a few schools with December 1 deadlines, but they're really not that many, other than the University of California, the 9 UC schools, UCLA, UC Berkeley. Then we have University of San Diego, Irvine. I'm kind of going from, south up. University of San Diego, right in San Diego, obviously, Irvine, Orange County. And then you get into Santa Barbara, north of LA. All right. And then you keep going up and you've got Merced, Riverside, and then you've got Santa Cruz, and then you've got UC Davis, really all the way up Sacramento. So those 9 schools, and there's actually a 10th one, which is the University of California, San Francisco, but they don't have undergraduate, so we're not counting them. 10 schools in the UC, 9 that do undergraduate. Those 9 undergraduate schools, they have an application that opens August 1, but it's submittable between October 1st and December 1st, that 60-day window. Now, we're in that submittable portion right now, and we're 2 weeks away. And in the UC app, you have to do 4 PIQs, personal insight questions. Now, what's a tip for them that I've been using? It's an acronym STARS, STARS. Here's what it stands for. S stands for situation. So describe the situation. So you've heard me say this a million times. Storytelling is powerful. Storytelling is impactful because stories are, probably some of you could say this now a million times. You've heard me all the time. They are personable, persuasive, interesting, and memorable. Personal, persuasive, interesting, and memorable. So you want to storytell. So paint the picture. Remember, the mind's a picture gallery. It's not an encyclopedia of facts. Write in a way where you're putting an image in people's mind. But you can't go all flowery. You don't have 650 words like the personal statements. You got to be fast, efficient, and succinct. But S stands for situation. TA, that stands for, the T stands for task. The A stands for action. Let me see the task or action that you took to address the situation you described. Okay. Now, there's 2 R's in STARS, not STAR, it's STARR. The first R is results. Let me see the results that you got from the task or action that you took to address the situation. That's the first R. And the last R stands for reflection. All the power's in the reflection. What do I mean by reflection? What did you learn? How did you grow? How did you change? How do you see things differently as a result of the experience that you had? Take that approach to your PIQs, but you got to do it very, very crisply, efficiently, with a lot of brevity, and answer the prompt specifically, and you should have a good, answer there. All right, let's move on to the last thing. I only bring this out every now and then. What is grinding my gears? Well, it's understandable. What gets inspected gets expected, right? You've heard me say this before. I find students look more at acceptance rate than rankings. And so admission officers know that. And if you're going to have a lot of a focus on acceptance rate and people are going to say, well, I'm not going to look at this school because it's got 80% acceptance rate. What does it lead to? It leads to a lot of manipulation on the part of colleges when it comes to their admit rate. Now, I'm not going to name the school. I know that's going to probably frustrate you because I normally name schools, but I like this school too much to name it. But I'm thinking of a school right now that shows an admit rate in the 30s. Okay, so a lot of people are like, okay, that's kind of pretty selective, and I'm going to use admit rate here. So they've met my screen. But they're giving $20,000 merit scholarships to people with a 2.75 GPA. Now, really? Are you really going to give $20,000 to people with a 2.75 GPA and claim that you have an acceptance rate in the 30s? You're clearly manipulating your acceptance rate. And so what grinds my gears are when colleges so distort, so admit their acceptance rate that it's like completely meaningless. And it's really, really common, by the way. So those of you who are using acceptance rate as a filter, there certainly are schools that their admit rate is their admit rate. But for the most part, it's a highly, highly, highly manipulated statistic. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you 5 ways in which colleges easily manipulate their admit rates. All right? 5 ways in which colleges easily manipulate their admit rates to the point where I frequently look at an admit rate and I'm like, shake my head because I'm like, that's just not even close to their actual admit rate. So I really encourage you to be very, very wary about using admit rates as a screen. All right. What are these 5 reasons? Well, the first one, it used to be more prevalent than it is now because there's been some cutting down on this, cracking down. But it's only counting an application if it's partially completed. So you have, a student fill out a very small portion, and they don't end up completing the application, but they complete a small portion, and you count it into your app total. And therefore, when admit rate just looks at acceptances, this really is impossible for it to be an acceptance because it wasn't completed, but you consider it a completed app. And we've talked about this before, right? You get the pre-filled form in the mail, just do this, and you're eligible for it, and you call that an application, right? So partial app, but you consider it a real app. Second one, and if you want to hear a little bit more about this, you got to go back about 5 years ago to when I interviewed Sue Corner, Dean of Admission at Willamette University. We did a whole interview on not using admit rates to judge schools. And one of the main reasons she said not to do it is because, do you know how easy it is for college to inflate their admit rate by recruiting to reject? And we got into how. So here's how you do it. Here's one way. There's lots of ways, but here's one way how you do it. Let's say you're a school that typically takes students who, let's just say they have maybe around a 3.2, 3.3 GPA. You're test optional. Your average test scores are like 21 ACT, 1100, SAT. And you want to show a low admit rate. Well, what you do is you use search, student search, right? Access to the whole entire database. Buy list of names, right? Talking about buying lists of names we've talked about all the different sources out there. Of course, College Board, ACT, the most common, but there's lots of others out there. We've talked about this before. Niche is becoming a really big player in this game. They've been so for about a decade now, but other sources as well. So you buy lists of names, and you buy lists of names with students with 2 5s, 2 3s, and you blitz the heck out of them with emails and mails, direct mail and email, making it sound very promising. We are interested in students like you, only to turn around and deny them. That's called recruiting to reject. And then this express goal is to drive your admit rate down, so people who are putting an admit rate filter on schools they attend will think, oh, wow, look, the school accepts 34%. That sounds good enough to me. They're only taking 1 out of 3. I can feel proud to go there. Well, you got to use the language of Malcolm X. You got bamboozled. You got hoodwinked. Recruiting to reject, second reason. Third reason, making it so easy to apply. So, I talked about that a little bit before with those Snap apps, right? That you just get. Simple, fills out, done. But there's other ways to make it easy to apply. No application fee, no essay. Then aggressively recruit people with free fee waivers, right? And make them feel really special. Because of how outstanding you are, you're going to get a free fee waiver. All attempts to drive up your applications, knowing that on the other end, someone's like, well, you gave me a free fee waiver. You have no essay. Why not? Takes me 10 seconds. Okay. By the way, any of these reasons in and of themselves are not inherently wrong. There's not anything wrong to give people a free fee waiver. It's not wrong to not have an app fee. But what I'm saying is these things are going to inflate your admit rate because you're going to attract a bunch of people that are not serious about you. You just made it so easy for them. There's zero commitment. They're like, why not? What the heck? Why not throw my name in the hat? It reminds me of, I started doing something a while ago, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'm going to come clean with you guys. I used to think that pedicure was something that guys didn't do. And I don't even know how I got my first one. Maybe I just decided to experiment. Ever since then, I'm addicted. Now I'm good. Put me down for at least 4 a year. So there's a new nail place not in Fairburn where I live. And I went in there the other day to get a pedicure. And at the end, when I left, they said, you want to throw a ticket in our drawing? We got a drawing coming up for $1,000. And every time you come, you get a ticket. Well, of course I was going to throw my ticket in there. It was nothing for me to do it. Literally, you gave me a piece of paper with a number. You asked me to put my my phone number, my email in there. He threw it in the little raffle bucket, and if I win, I get $1,000. Like no big deal, right? Like simple. Yeah, that's kind of how it is. If you're going to make it so simple to apply, like why would I not? So that's the third way that it's done. And then a fourth way that it's done is kind of what I talked about. Well, I actually didn't talk about it. I was talking about it yesterday with a student, how to lay the level of engagement that they, at least in the past and their previous administration, that they used to expect in order for them to take you seriously. So the fourth way is, unless a student has substantial amounts of engagement, then you're not going to admit them. I don't care how strong they are, So once again, these things in and of themselves are not wrong, but in totality, they can result in a very distorted admit rate. And then the last way in which admit rate is really distorted is, we haven't probably talked about this enough on the podcast because it can be really significant. So there are schools that have this crazy low acceptance rate for their international students, and then a really high number for their domestic students. A lot of times it's as simple as this. We don't give financial aid to international students, and very few schools have enough money to do that. But if you attract a lot of internationals and you don't give money, then you might have a really, really low admit rate. I remember one school, and once again, I'm not going to name a name here because I like the school and I don't want to kind of besmirch it. But on paper, they look like they have an admit rate in the 30s. So a lot of people, oh, wow, it's in the 30s. That's good enough for me. I can feel proud of wearing that shirt. But they have a 2% admit rate for their internationals, and they have over an 80% for their domestics. But they'll never tell you that, So, so having this incredibly distorted rate between your internationals and your domestics, and now it looks like you're way, way, way more selective than you are. So what grinds my gears is when an admit rate is so far out in left field compared to the real admit rate that it just completely feels like a distortion of the truth. But having said that, I get it. I feel the pressure. I remember feeling the pressure when I was in admissions, and I remember feeling we got to get our admit rate down, or I'm not going to get some of these DC sophisticated families to even walk on our campus. And I literally came back to the office and said, we got to get our admit rate down. And so we didn't just intentionally, go do things where we weren't going to accept a lot of people, but it involved going to some places where we knew we'd get hundreds of applications, and we knew we wouldn't be able to take as many from those pools. And we knew that would be an effective way to drive our admit rate down. So I would be hypocritical if I didn't say I've been a part of trying to help lower admit rate for the purpose of getting applicants to take us more seriously. But it still does grind my gears when it's way, way, way out of proportion. So anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed admissions tip, admissions vernacular, the big number, and I brought back grinding my gears and I went old school. All right, friends, let's transition to a brand new interview. Dr. Jay Hamilton at Stanford University professor that I thoroughly enjoyed.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part one of my interview with Dr. James Hamilton, Jay starts out by explaining how his sons were the ones that led him to write his new book that we're going to be talking about, You Got In, Now What? Which, by the way, is his 8th book he's written. Jay gives his background. Jay explains how the Stanford Long Range planning process influenced the book that he wrote. Jay explains why Mitchell Stevens' book, Creating a Class, is so special. Jay explains why economists oftentimes have just cutting-edge insights into explaining how college works. And Jay shares what he believes are the 7 different goals of a liberal arts education. Jay took a lot of time to think about what makes a liberal arts education special, and he came up with these 7 reasons. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Jay Hamilton. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Jay.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And I should call you Dr. Jay Hamilton. Do you want me to be formal? I'm happy to be formal. You've earned that.
Well, in high school, I was called Dr. J, but it was because of, I was a fledgling point guard.
Yeah, that is double significance. So I am very, very excited to have you here. I'll give you a little bit of background. I probably get 2 to 3 solicitations a day for people to come on the podcast. And it's normally somebody who wants to, get in front of our audience and sell their services. So sometimes I don't take them that seriously. And, your publicist was just kind of great. He was, he or she was really persistent. and then he mailed me a book. And then when I started reading it, I was like, wow. So first of all, I just want to thank you. Jay is the author of the book, You Got In, Now What? 100 Insights into Finding Your Best Life in College. And we're going to talk about that today. But I just personally wanted to thank you because this is a real gift to people who, are interested in this work.
Thank you. It was, it really came out of my 2 sons' experiences, seeing them in that summer before college and realizing that it would be great if they had a book to read to help them think about college. So I'm really happy to be here because it is sort of a labor of love. I'm not doing this for royalties or anything. I'm doing it because, I've taught thousands of students and I really care about how people navigate college. And I think if they can be more thoughtful about it, they'll have a higher probability of getting the most out of their experience.
No, I couldn't agree more. Let's start with your background, Jay. I always like to our listeners to have context. Share anything that you think will be helpful for a listener to kind of know the context from which you'll speak.
Sure. So I grew up, I was born on a military base and my dad was in the Army and I, traveled around and I was really fortunate to go to Harvard for both my undergraduate and PhD in economics. Turns out I discovered there and later when I taught at Duke for several decades that I love to teach. And when I came to Stanford, it was in part to focus on my research. I write books about the market for news. And it was in part to help train the next generation of accountability journalists. Stanford has an MA journalism program that's focused on data journalism. But I also got involved in academic administration. And one day, the president launched something that he called a long-range planning process. And he asked for suggestions. And I can talk a little bit later about how that led to the book. But short summary is I'm an economist and I write about media markets, including podcasting, and I love to teach.
Yeah, and Jay's being humble. He's won 8 teaching awards at Harvard, Duke, and Stanford. And so go a little bit more into unpacking the Stanford administrators coming to you, as part of their long-range planning process. Like, what exactly did they ask you to come up with? And talk about sort of the 7-tiered framework that that your research, culminating in this book and how the book's laid out for us.
So it was interesting. Stanford launched a long-range planning process. Anybody could send in suggestions, and I sent in a suggestion that they should create a book of essays by Stanford professors about how to navigate college. And that suggestion was not accepted, but it got me appointed to committee. That's what happens in academia. You offer an idea and you end up on a committee. And the committee was called the Shared First Year Experience. And out of that, through leadership of colleagues Sarah Church and Dan Edelstein, Stanford created something called the College Program. It's a 2-quarter requirement where students have to take in the fall a class called Y College, where they think about the nature of a liberal arts education. In the winter, they take a class on citizenship in the 21st century. And in the spring, they take a class on global perspectives. They have to take 2 out of 3 of those. So I was really happy about the reforms that came out. But in the back of my mind, I thought, I still think this book needs to get written. But I also realized my colleagues at Stanford, professors, alums, have written a lot of books. And so what I could do would be to read their books and write a book from that. And so day 2 of the project, I ordered 200 books from Amazon and I got my credit card shut down. So eventually got turned back on. I ordered 300 books. And from that, I was able to do it the old-fashioned way. So I read all the books, didn't use any generative AI. And I came up with what I think of are 100 lessons. Each of them are 1 sentence long, supported each by a 300-word essay, focusing on 2 people and illustrated by a cartoon by Jim Toomey, who's a Stanford alum. He is a syndicated cartoonist and he draws Sherman's Lagoon, but he and I were on our high school literary magazine. And so we sort of got the band back together.
Well, I had a real identification with your book. I wrote a book in 2016, and it's the exact same concept. I called it 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And it's the same thing. There's 171 chapters, short, pithy, right to the point, and an illustrator that illustrated with a true story for each of the points. It's the exact concept, but you were smart enough to make. I've got your book in my hand to make your whole book 230 pages. Mine was 692.
Ah, yeah. So I feel like I'm always competing with Mr. Beast, that in terms of attention, that
Yeah.
in today's world, you really need to reach before you teach. So you need to summarize. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually had a section on mine about how the attention span has changed over time. And you keep yours literally, each chapter feels like about 300 words, which makes it quick, short, to the point. I think mine might have been more like 600, but it's so easy and quick to read each and every one of the chapters, you know?
Thank you. And I used that word count. If it was 302, I went back and
Good
edited.
for you. Good for you. Okay, I'm curious, Stanford's got a couple of people that I like a lot in the past. One is Julie Lithcop-Hames. I don't know if you're familiar, with the book that she wrote, How to Raise an Adult Break Free of Overparenting Trap and Prepare Your Kid for Success. And then there's
I do know Dean Julie very well. Yes, and that book really catalyzed conversations across the country, and she really is very reflective about the pressures that students face today and the pressures that parents put on students today.
and then there's growth mindset. That's another Stanford. All right, I saw something in your book on that, so I figured you drew a little bit from that.
Yes, so Carol Dweck
Yes.
is in my book, and that idea that when you face a challenge, it's not a referendum on your intelligence, it's a chance for you to stretch and to grow. And as you know from all the work you've done,
Mhm.
today's students are sometimes risk averse. If they
Mhm.
find a challenge, they think it reflects poorly on them. They want an A right away all the time. And that can be debilitating because it could mean that you avoid situations where you would really learn. And it's funny, at Stanford, we have something called introductory seminars that are capped at 16 people. And Carol Dweck's always sells out. People know about growth mindset and they want to learn directly from her.
Well, it's funny. I was at a conference in Arizona, and I was just talking. Some didn't know who they are. And make a long story short, we ended up in an Uber together,
Mhm.
and with her and her husband. And then I had a most fascinating conversation. She was the keynote speaker at the conference, and at that time, I really didn't know who she was, but really, really a great contribution. There's some fantastic Stanford professors that have written some great work. So, what was it like reading 300 books from Stanford professors?
It made me so energized to be on campus because, when you're a professor, sometimes you're like a small business. You're doing your own thing, you're writing your books, and you often don't get to take the time to think about the works of so many different colleagues. So I was able to read books by scientists and humanists and social scientists, psychologists, and it really made me appreciative of just being a part of this community.
There's somebody else. I don't know if you're familiar with. He's a professor there. His name's Mitchell Stevens, and he wrote a fantastic book called "Creating a Class: College Admissions and Education of the Elites." And I'm actually hoping to have him on the podcast. I had Daniel Chambliss, who I don't know if you know Daniel. He was a professor for 40 years at Hamilton, and he wrote a book called "How College Works." And that's one of his former students. And so he's trying to connect me to have him come on the podcast. But according to our president at the National Association of College Admission Counseling, and I think I would agree, this is the best book at explaining how admissions works. Oh, you guys can't see it over there, but Jay's going over and grabbing the book off his shelf, one of 300. It's over there.
Oh,
Here, he's got it in his hand. Look at it. He's holding it up.
yes. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. This book by Mitchell Stevens is an amazing book. It because sometimes when we as parents, and I had students graduate recently, class of 21, 24, we think of it as an individual journey, but we don't think about the questions that a college faces with the composition of the class. Because you're really building a community, and I
Yeah.
think that's what creating a class does. It really, as you know, because it's sort of an ethnography, he
Yes.
embedded it for a year in a college and saw really also how difficult it is and wanted to put the class together. One of the distinctions that he makes is that people are reading files. They're not getting to know the individual. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you get an admission, suppose you get an admission rejection,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you take it very personally.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I look at it as an economist is there's a lot of incomplete information. It's very hard for schools to know the person. All they know is the file. And B, especially at schools that might have 30, 40, 50,000 applications, you can do a lot to put yourself in the lottery, but essentially a lot of it is outside of your control. And so I think that also comes through from Mitchell's book.
Before we get into your book, Jay, um, I've been struck by how some of the deepest, most reflective thinkers, some of the people that I feel are making the biggest contribution to this higher ed space are economists. I'm sure you're familiar with Ross Chetty. Of course, he used to be at Stanford. You probably, and then he's at Harvard. You might even know Ross Chetty, but you know, Ross Chetty's done a tremendous amount of work. And then there's another guy named Phil Levine who's at Wellesley,
Mhm.
who's come up with, this thing called My Intuition. It's like 6 questions that gives you a basic sense of what you're likely to pay so that people can even know whether they can go forward at these schools that are the $100,000 price point. And now he's come up with the one question. It's not perfect, but it gives a family a basic framework to know whether this school is in range. But anyway, I'm getting into the weeds. But my bigger question is, what is it about the way economists are trained that's allowing them to provide some of the most cutting edge, research that I'm seeing coming out in the higher ed space?
I think in part, my definition of economics is individual decision making under conditions of scarcity.
Mm,
And so we're sort of trained to think about how does an individual make a decision? What are the trade-offs she might be
mm-hmm,
facing? And when you're in a world of choosing among colleges, that's really the definition of a trade-off.
mm-hmm,
And the second thing is it's a popular source of research now because the data are so much better. If you go back to the
mm-hmm,
1980s, 1990s, you're in a world of entering in data by hand, doing things on mainframe computers. Now you can basically write papers in part from information you can scrape from the web. You can scrape syllabi. You can scrape information or collect information down to the census tract level on the opportunities people have had. And so there's a lot better data so we can ask more refined questions. And then, to be frank, also, I think that there are market failures which are pretty interesting in the market for higher education. For instance, when you and I become better citizens, when we think more critically, when we vote, it benefits us, but it also benefits the community that we live in. And those benefits spill over onto many other people. Or when universities invest in R&D and create ideas, those ideas are things that are called public goods. Once I create a fact, anybody can consume it, even if they didn't pay for it. And so there are these challenges of how do we support ideas and how do we invest in people so that they become better citizens and those benefits spill over onto others. And so economists like challenges, like thinking about what to do when the market fails. So it's really, we love studying trade-offs, we love data, and maybe if the market isn't working so well, we could think about how to improve on it.
I had a real epiphany when you were saying that, because when I think of the work of Levine and certainly Ross Chetty, there definitely seems to be a through line of scarcity that I see in their writing. But both of them have made prodigious contributions to higher ed. Yeah, I'm most grateful. But let's get back to your book. So, talk to me about sort of the 7-tier framework that frames the whole book and how you came to the point to come up with them. And why don't you tell our listeners, what the 7 main rubrics are?
Sure. So it was interesting. Initially, I would be in discussions where people would talk about the liberal arts education, but they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
really define it.
Mm-hmm.
And so through reading these books, I really came to realize to me there are 7 goals of a liberal arts education. And the first one is signaling. You got in and you graduated. Employers use that as a prediction of your future productivity. And there was a Stanford professor, Michael Spence, who put that into math and got the Nobel Prize for it.
There you
Basically,
go.
the idea is that it's a signal. Second is network. Those are the friends you make in your dorms. Those are the teachers who become your mentors, the honors
Mm-hmm.
advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Third is domain specific knowledge. So I'm an economist. I think
Mm-hmm.
of things in that framework. And number 4 is critical thinking skills, the ability to spot a problem, gather information, develop a hypothesis, test that idea. And the beauty of the market is that it rewards all of those things, your degree, your network, your knowledge, and your critical thinking skills. But the reason why universities, some of them are nonprofits, are the final 3 reasons. One is moral self-development. What's the nature of a good life? One is citizenship. Everybody lives in community and they face decisions of, do I volunteer? Do I vote? Do I get involved in things that benefit others, not just myself? And then the final goal is just intrinsic love of learning, basic
Mm-hmm.
curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
On campus, we call that sometimes basic research, and sometimes it becomes applied research and gets rewarded down the road. But when I step back and say, as an administrator at Stanford, what are my hopes for an undergraduate education? It really relates to those 7 goals.
No, that's great. And so what Jay's done in this book is he's taken 100 insights into finding your best life in college. So we've said for a while we want to not only focus on getting to college, but success in college. So this is what this book does. And how did you come up with your 100 insights within? They're under subtitles or titles of meaning, purpose, thinking, choosing, connecting, identity, citizenship, and then your last one, how to go wrong. So how did you come up kind of with the 100 insights under those 7 bigger captions?
So I love, as we've talked about, I love to read. So I read those
Mm-hmm.
300 books, those
Mm-hmm.
commencement speeches. That yielded 600 single-spaced pages of notes.
Whoa.
And yeah, and then I reread the notes several times with a highlighter. and I started to see groupings. And then I forced myself to, when I looked at a grouping, say, how would I summarize that in one sentence? And then I started to write those sentences. And it's really interesting. One other thing I did was I kept an Excel spreadsheet listing the number of times I referenced a person's story. Because to be frank, I could have written the entire book probably through the sayings of Cory Booker. He is just so insightful in
Another
his
Stanford guy. Another Stanford
autobiography.
guy. Yep.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And in fact, his saying from his mother is my favorite insight from the book. But that's what I did. 600 pages, 100 one-sentence statements. Then as I would write a 300-word essay to illustrate each of the statements, I would also keep that Excel spreadsheet. And I limited myself. The most times I could refer to anyone was in 4 lessons, and most people only get 1.
There you go. How long did it take you to do this? This sounds like a major research project. 300 books, commencement speeches, summarizing 600 pages.
Yes, yeah. It took me 2 years
Yeah.
to do it, to read all the books and to write it. And then, you know, as an author, once you are done, you're not really done, because
Right.
then there's the production process. But
Sure.
from idea to reading to writing to that's 2 years.
Talk to me about the commencement speeches. Like, did you find them as valuable as the books? Like, how helpful were they to you in your research?
Actually, they were really great, because one of the things that I would face is, suppose I was reading somebody's biography or autobiography. I was looking for their life lessons. I was also looking for them perhaps reflecting on their time in college. And that's part of the genre of a commencement address. So people are already talking about that naturally. So probably on a per page basis, I got more insights from the commencement addresses than a page of an individual book.
No, I've been challenging my students to go back and listen to commencement speeches from presidents as a way to sometimes get to the core or the essence of a school, because a lot of times they'll deliver that there. Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Jay Hamilton. Hope you join us next week for the final part. On Thursday episode, Vince is back, and we're talking about an article so many of you sent in for us to discuss. Tulane University punishing a school because a student burned them and applied ED and chose not to go. Vince and I are going to be talking about it, and we got a range of perspectives on that topic that I think you'll find interesting. And friends, we've got a brand new interview for you, and it's Jin Chow. If you remember, Jin was back about a year ago telling us all about polygents. Well, they've got a brand new thing called Work Labs. It's an opportunity for a student to work in an area of interest, and it's very exciting, and I can't wait to bring it to you guys. And we've been getting great feedback on our student series, so as promised, I'm doing 6 of these in a row. And it's Daniel LaChance, another repeat interviewee. Dan's a student at Rochester Institute of Technology, getting close to graduating. He's going to reflect back on RIT and going to put a specific focus on the jobs that he got through his experience at RIT, which is a co-op school. And friends, I hope you never forget that it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your level of career success. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.